Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and I'm here to give you my best books that I read in 2023. In the year of 2023, I read 224 books. That is breaking my all-time personal best for reading in a single year, and so I had to choose 23 favourites for this 2023 year. I couldn't narrow it down further than that, and I'm so excited to tell you about all of them. They will be in no particular order, but I'll be doing my top 3 books at the end. And then I also want to mention that there are content warnings in the description box down below if that's something you may need for all of the books that I discuss in this video. And without further ado, let's get down to the best books I read last year. I wanted to start with You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke and Emezi. This is a literary romance book by a black author which is following our main character who is queer. She is a young widow and she is struggling with the fact of moving on after her husband has passed away, who was her best friend and her high school sweetheart. But when she starts letting herself be open to other relationships, she ends up falling for her current kind of casual partner's best friend, and from there the drama unravels. Now, there are so many things that I love about this book, and my first favourite thing has to be Akwaeke and Emezi's writing. Their writing is just so lyrical and so beautiful, and I love it. It's my favourite kind of adult romance, when you can bring that kind of literary writing style to a romance book, and they do that immaculately well. It's also dripping with blackness in very small and discreet and casual ways, and I loved seeing that on the page. I could see some of myself in this book, and that's always so lovely to experience as a reader. And then the romance itself, it is M-E-S-S-Y, messy to the max. I gave you the synopsis, but that does not even get into the layers of the messiness that this book brings. And I love that it's got readers all up in a stir, all up in a twist, with whether the main character did the right thing or whether other things could have been done better. But all that is to say, love is at the center of this book. Love for yourself. There's so much focus on self-love, but also love for other people, and how sometimes love is not straightforward, love is not easy, and you might not fall for the person that you think you should fall for, and what are you going to do to fight for that love? What I also adore about this book is how communication is so clear throughout the whole thing. There is no miscommunication, and yet the romance is the messiest one I have ever read before, and I admire the fact that Akwaeke and Emezi could be like, you don't like miscommunication trope? Here's the most communication you could ever expect, but things will still be able to go not necessarily wrong, but definitely sticky and unsure and messy. It's a beautiful book. It ends in just the right place, and it just does such a good job of leaving you thinking long after you've turned that last page. Another one of my best books is Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid, and I read this one and I thought it was good and I gave it 4 stars, but it has not left my mind since. I absolutely raced through this book. So in this one, you're following our main character, and she is a nanny, and she's a nanny for a white family while she is black, and because of a certain series of events, she ends up emergency nannying for them late at night, and she's in a shop with the young child that she's looking after, who is white, and she gets accused of having kidnapped that child. I cannot even begin with this book. I find it really hard to like books with passive main characters where they don't seem to be taking control of the events of the book, and they seem to be letting lots of things happen to them. And it's not because they don't want to fight for themselves, it's because they just simply want to be content with life. I'm used to characters who are striving to be happy, but there are people who are just striving to be content with life, and it's nice to kind of see that in a book, see a different kind of main character. But she's having so many things happen to her, so many talks of like racism in this book, so many talks of classism, and also so many talks of like what makes you happy in life. And while she's just trying to be content, everyone is trying to shovel happiness, or what they think is best for her, what they think is the right thing for her to do, onto her, and she's kind of just facing that avalanche of expectation. And I just really liked our main character for how she dealt with all of that and how she kind of saw this narrative through. And I know that I talked about the premise being about racism and the nannying situation, but there's a lot more tied into this, and these threads come together expertly well to make a really cringe moment, and it ultimately really discusses the microaggressions that people face and microaggressions in a very certain specific sense where they believe that they are doing the best for you when actually they are doing the worst and they are getting in their way. A little bit of talking about white saviorism in this. It was so well done, just so expertly done in a very discreet and underhand way that the more I think about this book, the more I realise and acknowledge and appreciate its genius. We're switching to non-fiction now. One of the best essay collections I read this year by far was Disability Visibility, which is edited by Alice Wong, but they're essays by several different disabled people, and these essays span so many different disabilities, whether that comes with like mental disabilities, physical disabilities, people who use aids like wheelchairs and canes, if you're a disabled parent, if you're someone who's disabled and is in fashion. It's just so many facets of disabled life, lifestyle and culture is wrapped into this one book that you can easily buy, read and learn. Just learn so much. And I learned so much. I learned ways in which I can help navigate people who are blind in case I meet them in person and they need guided somewhere. I also learned what it's like to be a disabled parent, some of the joys of that, but also maybe some of the difficulties that they face as well. And even though this is a collection of disabled experiences, and you may think that some of them might be doom or gloom and some of them were horrible, disgusting, disappointing, there were also so many that were uplifting, that were happy, that were celebratory, and I just loved seeing that mix of disabled culture and just being immersed into it by reading these pages and being welcomed into that space where I could learn and experience and take from it and carry that into my daily life. I do think I've learned so much from reading this one book, and I think it's such a great resource for people out there who are wanting to learn more about how they can better be an ally to the disabled community. One of the best graphic novels, I read a lot of graphic novels last year, but one of the best graphic novels that I had the most fun reading was Project Nought by Chelsey Furedi. So Project Nought is a sci-fi, time-traveling, young adult romance graphic novel, just layer it all in there, and it's following these teenagers who live in the futuristic society, and as part of their historical studies they bring people back from the past and you partner up and you kind of have an experience with them. However, there may be something more sinister about bringing people from the past forwards to have this experience and then sending them back than what is on the surface. And I love this book. I just think it's one of those ones that's really creative and manages to be a graphic novel, which ultimately it's not that much space, it's not that much time, and you've got to work a lot with images to tell the story, and it told a good story. It told a jolly good story. The plot was unpredictable, it had enough suspense to it, it had enough build, and it managed to delve into the sci-fi elements, delve into the time travels and all that timey-wimey fun stuff, while also showcasing how it's possible for a corporation to do what they're doing. I loved our two characters, especially our main character. He stole my absolute heart. I just loved how he was so... he's not the one stories are usually about. He's too quiet, he's too shy, he just wants to exist. Again, as I was saying, passive characters, he just wants to exist, he just wants to fold himself away, but he's in the middle, he's been dragged to the future and he's in the middle of this maelstrom and he has to do something about it. I also really liked his love interest, who was just so genuine and like a ball of happiness and was so excited about everything, was so excited about this time travel experience and having this partner. They were just such a cute couple. I did think I forgot to mention this was queer. We've got an MM relationship at its core, but there's also non-binary secondary characters. There's a wheelchair user secondary characters. So it's quite a wholesome one in terms of representation as well. And also in the future, there's no homophobia or discrimination based on gender or anything like that. And I like seeing that kind of future in a sci-fi book. The best middle grade that I read this year was Fireborn, Phoenix and the Frost Palace by Aisling Fowler. This is actually the second book in a series. Look at me getting a sequel on my best books of the year, and I just love this middle grade adventure fantasy book. I will tell you about the first one because it's hard to talk about the second one, but in the first one you follow 12. She's a young girl who's training to be a warrior in this kind of school for orphans, more or less, and you kind of have to denounce your family and your history and your past to become this kind of warrior. And in the process of doing that, she makes friends with someone at the school who is then kidnapped, and she goes on an adventure with an unlikely group of people that she's kind of friends with, kind of not friends with, to go and rescue this girl, and they get caught up in a whole load more. Now, if you like things like Percy Jackson when you were younger, this is just perfect for you because it's so fun, the world is so adventurous, it's so creative, you've got a found family in this core friendship that forms between unlikely people, and they have to face so many truths about themselves in order to become that tight bud of friendship that they they form. And in this second one in particular, I really thought I knew where the storyline was going. I thought it was all going to be straightforward, but it wasn't. There were twists and there were turns and there were exciting points, and I think I just grew to love Felix as a main character all the more because of the ways in which she has grown throughout this book and truly developed into the young little child that she is. It's so adorable seeing her growth. It's so fun being in this world, and in this one you go to like a different section of the world than you were before. Get that fun feeling of discovering a whole new world all over again while it's still building on some of the history and world building that it created in the first book too. It was suspenseful, it was fantastic, and it ended in a place where I really just want the third book in the series as soon as I possibly can get it. This is the middle grade series that I'm recommending this year. We're moving along to Sinner by Sarah Simone. I read this series back in January, and this is one of the 2 books that I reread this year. I read it for the first time this year and then I reread it again, and I've read it again since because it's just such a good steamy book. This one is an age gap romance with light BDSM themes, and we're following our main character who's a bit of a playboy. He's used to just being a playboy, not falling in love, and he's dealing with a lot because his mum has terminal cancer and is currently dying. And then he goes to this event and he sees this woman and he really likes her, and when he comes across her again he realizes 2 things. The first is that it's his best friend's younger sister who he hasn't seen in a very long time, and the next thing he realizes is that she's currently training to be a nun, so she's a bit off limits. However, in the process of becoming a nun, her head nun of the nunnery realizes that she's never had sex before and says, if you're going to give up sex for your whole life, please go and have as much sex as you can while you're training to be a nunnery so you can be sure that that is something you want to give up. Which might sound unconventional, but we get the story that we get from it, and I had a jolly good time with this story. I think our love interests have a lot of chemistry and I really liked seeing their chemistry. I don't know why Sarah Simone loves to put like lots of religious imagery in her books, but she does, and I think there is a lot of crossover between religious imagery and sexual desires, and she finds where those points meet and just takes it to town. The steam was rising off of the pages as I was reading this book. I have read some of my favourite steamy scenes when I was reading this book, but also I really think it did a good job of not like just being lots of steam and forgetting about the storyline. It does a very good job of talking about the experience that he has with his mother being terminally ill, by being responsible for his mother while she is terminally ill, and kind of how difficult that is and how emotionally intense that is. But also they learn from each other, and I really like that. I love seeing that, yes, she is learning from him in a lot of ways in the bedroom, but he is learning a lot about how to live life properly and to find true fulfillment in life by being around her and her routines and her practices and some of the things that she brings from the nunnery. And I really like that. It was almost a bit of like a Scrooge situation with him, and his eyes are truly opened through this relationship. It's just a beautiful relationship with really nice sex scenes, and I had the most fun reading that series this year because I couldn't do anything. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just had to read the whole series. So that it definitely made it onto my best books of the year list. Switching tones entirely, we're going to be talking about adult literary fiction. This is translated from French and it is Fresh Water for Flowers by Valerie Perrin, which is the best fictional book I read about grief this year. So in this one you're following a woman. She works in a cemetery. She's a cemetery keeper. She loves her job. She's very good at her job, and she is also continuously grieving. Her husband has gone missing several years ago. She does not know where he is, and when this man kind of comes into her life and shakes everything up, it sparks this story. And as we learn about her relationship with this new man who's come into his life kind of looking for someone to help him bury his dead mother, she herself is looking into her past and why she is so closed off from people and hiding away in a cemetery. It was emotional. It was so emotional. But what I loved most about this book, beyond the emotions of grief, I'll start here, is the masterful use of perspective in this book. Nearly all of it is from her perspective, and you carry that narrative throughout the book, and you learn about different secondary characters through her eyes, and you either hate them or you love them, but everything just feels so concrete. You're so sure of how you judge every single character based through her eyes. And then slowly it starts to feed in a second narrative of someone who you probably dislike from the way that she's painted him. But the more that you learn about him, the more you just understand that in this book, nobody wins. Everybody is hurting. Everybody's hurting in very different ways, and the ways that that manifests is why they act the way they do. And you understand, you don't have to like it, but you will 100% understand, and that is how you use perspective to tell a very good story. But it is largely about grief, and what I like is that even though it's focused on her experience with grief, it's threaded in with the people who come through her cemetery, and all of those individual grief experiences accumulate to complement and just further embellish the emotion that you feel when you hear about the grief that she is dealing with. It's an unfathomable grief, but that kind of grief in the way that it's described in this book hurt. It hurt my entire soul. I will put that content warning for the type of grief that it is at the front of the content warnings down below, just so that you know what you're going into. But this book packs an emotional punch. It's written beautifully, and what a masterful use of perspective. Okay, on that light-hearted note, we're going to talk about one of the two best poetry collections I read this year, and that is A Little Resurrection, and this is by Nwulu. And this is a poetry collection which is all about resurrecting, coming back to life as a black woman in a space where it's hard for you to come to life fully, coming to life in who you are, in self-love as a woman. There's just so many iterations and takes on what it means to resurrect, and it talks about like the death and the revival. As you can see in my best books video, I really like grief and themes of death, so that is woven into the poetry here, but it's just worded so beautifully and structured so well that each poem got to me. Some poems are a bit shorter, some poems are a bit longer, and it's really hard to review poetry, but I just need to say, if you do like reading poetry, this is one collection that is completely underrated and such a gem. I just thoroughly recommend it. So the next book on my favourites list is The Comeback by Lily Chu, and this book was embodying me at the moment that I read it. It was 100% where I was at. Now, if I tell you the synopsis of this book, you're going to be like, what on earth are you talking about? Because no, it's not me. We're following a American Asian main character who is in a law firm, and she's one of the only Asian people there, and she's not been promoted, and she's really trying hard to get promoted, and she's wondering if she even enjoys being in the law career path at all. However, she has a lot of pressure from her dad, who really wants her to be a lawyer, and she is just kind of living day to day in that cycle when her cousin's cousin kind of ends up in their flat just house sitting because he needs somewhere to go after a bad breakup, and then they start to kind of form a romance and things happen, and then she discovers that actually he is the lead singer in a crazily famous K-pop band, and she's fallen for him. And that's the story. No, I've not got a K-pop singer laying in my house who is secretly world famous that I've fallen in love with. But I just really love how Lily Chu always manages to write a romance that's full of romance tropes, that's full of fun, that's full of glamour, that's full of out-of-the-world situations, realistically, while also really talking about both of those characters' individual developments, because there's no way at the start of the book they can be in a relationship that they form. They need to develop and change to get to where they need to be. I loved the K-pop romance stuff. I'm not even a K-pop stan, but I just loved how it talked about the music, how it talked about what it means to have an idol, it, like, celebrated the culture of being a K-pop singer, but also like being a K-pop stan. That's all woven into it, kind of the K-pop culture. I loved getting into that world and just seeing what it's like, even though I'm not part of it in the slightest. It was so much fun. And I also feel like it was quite realistic in how it dealt with the fact that a normal person has fallen in love with a celebrity. Sometimes I read the normal person ex-celebrity trope and I'm just like, this would never happen, it would never work out that way. But the way this book ended and the way this book dealt with that, I just felt every single step of the way was quite realistic and I could easily believe the story. Our main character is absolutely delightful. I just love her. She's having a difficult relationship with her sister that she needs to figure out, and of course a very complicated relationship with her parents and their expectations on her life. All of that she manages to deal with. There's enough time given to the sister storyline, there's enough time given to the parents one, and there is so much time given to her figuring out what she really wants to do with her life, career-wise, happiness-wise, I appreciated all of that being juggled alongside the romance so well and evenly, and I just loved seeing her kind of work through that, because she's not naturally a romantic person. She has to learn how to give time to that, but she's also someone who will overcrowd her day and struggle to take breaks and struggle to appreciate some of the things that she should celebrate about herself. And I think that's where I ended up relating to this character a lot. But this book is entirely from her perspective and not from her male love interest perspective at all, and yet it's so clear to see on the page where he is struggling with his friendships, where he is also struggling with pressures of expectation and questioning if he's chosen the right thing to do at every stage of his career. And I love that even though you don't get into his mind at all, you absolutely get into his mind through reading this story. Again, I think that's very good writing, and all of the books I read this year, they're on my best list, were very good writing. The Archaeology of Loss by Sarah Tarlow was the best non-fiction book I read about grief, and the one that moved me the most. It's her memoir, and she's talking about, this is not a spoiler to say because it says it right in the beginning, she's with her husband. She's thinking of being separated from her husband, and she's going through like the emotional turmoil of like, how do we sort out our marriage, when her husband is not diagnosed with anything. He's just falls ill, and that illness accelerates very quickly. They cannot figure out what is wrong, and he dies. And in the process of his deterioration and that big acceleration, she is his carer, and he needs intense care, constant care, and she is juggling a job, she is juggling being a mother, and now she's suddenly juggling being a carer for someone who their condition is undiagnosed. They don't know if they're going to get better, they don't know if they're going to get worse, they don't know if they're going to die or not, and the whole situation is so emotionally intense. I cannot imagine the immense pressure that she must have been in, because even at the beginning of this whole experience, their marriage was falling apart when all of this happened. It's a lot to contend with, and she does such a good job of being entirely frank and honest with us. She mentions the points where she feels like she failed. She mentions the points where she didn't know if she could continue on. She mentions the brilliant sides of her husband, but also is unafraid to talk about not necessarily the bad sides of her husband, but you know, in those kind of situations where you're maybe terminally ill, maybe not at your best, there are not good sides to you. There just always will be, and she mentions those sides too. And throughout all of this, she acknowledges the fact that she is telling the story, and you cannot entirely judge her husband because you do not get his perspective. He does not get a say in this narrative, which I think was just so gracious and open-minded of her to be able to tell this story in a multifaceted way that's just so brutally honest to how she was feeling, but also make her husband come alive and humanize him, while also showing that we cannot fully understand what he's been going through throughout this process. I related to it a lot as someone who has become a primary carer again this past year of my life, and while my depiction of care is not the same, it's not a partner, I'm not a mother, there were loads of things that struck and rung very, very true with me, but also it is inevitably a discussion of grief, a grief that you can probably see coming, but you're always going to be hopeful that it's not coming because there is no diagnosis. And how do you grieve for someone else, and how do you grieve for a change of who you were with that person when things were healthy and good? And how do you grieve for yourself for the time that you are losing by needing to care, by needing to put aside some of the things that you wanted to do because life is demanding something else? There's so many layers to the grief in this one, and it's heartbreaking and emotionally intense, and it was just written so well. I can't tell you much more about this one. You do have to just go in and experience it for yourself. Loveboat Taipei by Abigail Hing Wen. This is the best young adult contemporary book that I read this year. It deals with the topic of identity, which is one of my favorite topics to read, in an astonishing way. It's about an Asian American girl who is going to be a doctor. She doesn't want to be a doctor, she doesn't want to go into medicine, but her parents didn't move to the US and kind of go through all of the difficulties that they did as people who immigrated. so that she doesn't become a doctor. What she really wants to do is dance, and her parents don't think that's a viable career for her. Her parents decide to send her away from her last dance performance and send her to Taipei to go to this like school camp where she can study more to be better ready to become a doctor. But what she doesn't know is that although to adults this seems like a very prestigious camp where they're going to learn a lot and it's going to be super strict, it's actually not. There's a lot of romantic drama that's sizzling and bubbling under the surface, and Loveboat Taipei is actually just romance drama through and through and through. And I love this book. It's got a romance square at its core. There are so many multiple love interests that she has to choose between, and for the life of me I could not tell who she would choose. And I think if you've got like a love triangle or a love square or any situation, one of the key things to make it succeed is that the reader should not know who the person is going to choose, and I truly didn't. But there's so much more to this than just the romantic drama, which is great, don't get me wrong. There's so much more to it because she is also really struggling to find who she wants to be. Does she want to be a dancer? Does she want to be the ideal immigrant child? Is she pushing back into dancing just to go against her parents' wishes? Is this truly what she wants at her core? And this book kind of discusses that, and she finds herself. She finds herself throughout this novel by doing the right things, but also equally by doing the wrong things. And what I appreciated is that her finding herself is only exasperated and echoed by the fact that all of the secondary characters are also going on exactly the same journey as her in the background, having their own individual struggles and finding themselves in their own way. In the end, I was just filled with so much euphoria because all of them find themselves, but in the process of all of these characters trying to find who they are, of course, they trip and stumble over each other and make things go wrong for each other. There's also a very difficult female relationship at the core of this, and I think if you start reading you may misread it as girl on girl hate. Please do continue. There's a lot more to unpack there, and I really liked how this book touched on that relationship and where both those characters went wrong but also ultimately went right for each other in the end. It was really good, and I had a fantastic time reading it. The most messed up and weirdest and strangest book I read this year was Earthlings by Sayaka Murata, and it was also one of the best books I read this year too. In this one we're following this young girl and her cousin, and they pretend that they're in love with each other in a romance the way kids do, but they also pretend that they are aliens from outer space who don't belong in the human world. And the reason why they're doing this and pretending they're aliens is because they are both going through very highly traumatic things. This book has intense content warning. Check the description box down below. It also goes into their adulthood. It talks about trauma. It talks about how unaddressed trauma can explode and become really dangerous, I would say. Like, unaddressed trauma is not a good thing. It talks about how unaddressed trauma is not a good thing. It talks about capitalism and the ways in which the actions we choose and what we do kind of funds and fuels capitalism. It talks about how normalization and normativity is such a negative thing. Having a concept of a normal that people cannot fit into as much as they try to fit into is ultimately so toxic for everyone, because it can really explode and cause complete opposite actions when nobody feels like they can fit in because normal, or what is determined as normal, is so unattainable. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's absolutely horrifying too. There were moments reading this where I felt like I was going to be physically sick because it is so disgusting to read, but there were also times when I couldn't help giggling because the black humour and the satirical humour in this is just so well timed and well placed that you can't help but laugh even though you were disgusted maybe a couple pages earlier. And that's kind of the genius in this book, but also the tragedy in this book. I don't think I can describe it better than that. It is a whole wealth of things in one short translated book. The best non-fiction graphic novel I read this year was Mouse by Art Spiegelman. This is a very well-known graphic novel, and I'm so glad that I was able to get to it this year. There's two narratives in this, and it's ultimately all drawn by the son of a survivor, the son of someone who survived the Holocaust. He is interviewing his father and telling his father's story, but simultaneously you see him interviewing his father in the present day, and you see his interactions with his father too. Now, I've read a lot of non-fiction about World War II and the Holocaust, and a lot of fiction about it, and watched lots of films and documentaries, and throughout that whole process I never thought what it is like for the second generation of people that follow on to the survivors and how generational trauma trickles down. I never really taken the time out of my research to kind of think about that and how it affects them. And reading this graphic novel, the generational trauma is so clear and evident, but also the pain behind that generational trauma, because he understands what his dad has gone through is despicable, but then he also in his present day interactions struggles with some of the things that his father does because of trauma, but equally he understands. And that dichotomy is like, how do you deal with that? How do you handle that? How do you translate and process that and continue on from that and love throughout that? And that's what got me a lot about this book. But don't get me wrong, seeing the dad's experience and his telling of his experience through what he went through the Holocaust, when it comes to family, when it comes to friends, when it comes to the abuses that were done to him and his body and his mind, it's atrocious. It's so atrocious to read. And continuously reading that book, I was thinking like, never again can we have genocide on that mass level, never again can we permit genocide on that level. And it would be wrong of me to talk about this book and not mention the Palestinian genocide that is happening right now. And it scares me. It really scares me that I can read this book about the Holocaust and this mass genocide that happened, and there can be so many different forms of genocide still happening in this present day. Reading this book as well, the very genius thing about it is that none of the characters are portrayed as humans. Jewish people are portrayed as mice, the Nazis are portrayed as cats, and the Polish people are portrayed as pigs. This has to do with a metaphor that Hitler used during the time, and it's quite clever because it's embodying that metaphor in the book, which suits the theme of the book. But it also means that even as horrifying things are happening on the page, there's an element of removal because they don't look like humans. There's an element of removal emotional removal because they don't look like you when it's happening, but that doesn't detract from how awful it is. It just means it's not visually graphic in a traumatizing way, but because you know this happened in real life, it still has that emotional impact. It's an amazing graphic novel. It's an amazing graphic novel. We have Concerning My Daughter by Kim Hye-Jin, and this is translated by Jamie Chung. And this one is a book that really grew on me the more and more that I thought about it, and actually became one of the best books I've read this year. It's a short translated novel about an elderly woman who lives in Korea, and she volunteers at a nursing home, and she has a daughter, and her daughter has a girlfriend, and she does not approve of her daughter being gay. So she's really unhappy about the fact that her daughter is gay and doesn't really face up to that fact. But when her daughter is broke and needs to come back home and move in with her girlfriend as well, she kind of has it in her face that her daughter is gay and needs to confront that about herself, like how she feels about it, but also how it's changing and affecting her relationship with her daughter as well. And I've read many queer stories in my life as someone who reads diversely, I guess, or tries to at least, and I'd never read a book about queer people actually living within Asia, and this book made me realise I need to read more books, not only about queer Asian Americans or queer Asian British people within those countries. It's great to do that, but it's also really good to read about people living in those countries, embodying or living their life out and proud and queer. Doing so was quite eye-opening to me, but also what I liked about this one is the elderly perspective. I just learned so much about the ways in which elderly people think about themselves and have to grieve for the past lives that they've had, and how difficult it is for them to change their minds and change their perspectives, but also how they are still able to, if they try. They're thinking a lot of things, and it's wrong to say that elderly people can't change their mind, because they are changing their mind on who they are all the time, and also changing how they see themselves and how they are living their lives on an everyday basis, because that's what aging means. And it was so reflective and quiet and moving in a very powerful way. If you're queer, you can also read this one without being like traumatized by the homophobia, because whenever the elderly woman says or does something homophobic, it summarizes it like, she said some despicable things, or she said some homophobic things, rather than listing it out and putting it on the page, which I felt was a very clever way of not re-traumatizing the people that this book is about. It was a very good book. I've talked about this book a lot this year, but I have to mention The Secret Barrister. This is a non-fiction book by a barrister who is anonymous, and they talk about the law system in the UK and how it's flawed, how it's broken, and why you should care about it being flawed and broken. I learned so much about how the law system really works from a barrister's perspective, and they do a good job of holding your hand throughout the whole process, breaking down what really happens from the case being brought to court to the end of it and the outcome and what it means for all parties involved. It does a very good job of showing how politics is woven into law and crime and justice, and how they are all interwoven, how they actually are not working, how money and funding means it's not working and not serving the country, and why you need to care about it. There's a list of, at the end there's a list of things that could be done to improve it and to make it better, which I always think is important when you're talking about these subjects in non-fiction, not to make it all doom and gloom, but to show why you need to care and what you can do to help with that. And it also talks about some case-specific studies, some experiences that they've had in the court with people, and some of them are fictional, some of them are real, but the important thing is that the outcome and how you feel afterwards, angry, sad or satisfied, says a lot about not only you, but what you want the law system to do, and then it goes to describe the ways in which the law system might not be doing those things. And it was outrageous, it was eye-opening, it was shocking, and it had a really good sense of humour to it at the same time, in terms of it's not laugh out loud funny, but the tone seems to kind of embody what you would expect the tone of a lawyer to be, but then it's also got some sarcasm and wit in it. So even though it's a hard non-fiction book with a lot of information being given to you, it does it in a way that's entertaining and easy to process and easy to understand. And I love how accessible it is, but also I do think it's really important. A lot of our morals and ethics are based on the law system, and if that's not serving your country and it's not serving what you want, you need to speak up. Something needs to be done about it. The other poetry collection I really loved this year was Don't Call Us Dead by Danez Smith, and this one has been around for a very long time. It's about Black queer experience. Pretty much that's it. And the reason why it says Don't Call Us Dead is because it's talking about some of the ways in which Black queerness is dead and constantly dying on a loop, from the way that people treat them, from the way that they experience the world or cannot experience the world because of limitations put onto them. It's just so well embodied in these poems. There's quite a few poems that kind of interconnect with each other. It's quite a wholesome collection. You could read this whole collection as one big poem, but you can also read them as individual long poems too. And the ways that it is written, like the wording on the page, the literary devices deployed, pulled at me. They pulled at me, and especially the use of like metaphor and imagery and the constant don't call us dead, like I'm not dead yet, I want to survive this, I'm not dead yet, I'm here, I'm existing, I'm not dead yet. That concept, that mindset is carried throughout the whole collection, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to live your life thinking I'm not dead yet and therefore I'm okay. And this book shows why they feel that way, but also how we're wronging them by letting them feel that way. It was an emotionally intense poetry collection. It was so good. Probably my favourite one of the year. Another one of my favourite young adult contemporary fictions I read this year was My Mechanical Romance by Alexine Farrell Fulmuth. So this is about a girl who's kind of underachieving in school. She's not really interested in going to university. Her parents have recently split up because one of the parents cheated, and knowing that there's a parent who was in the wrong is a whole complication that she has to face and process and deal with and reevaluate her relationship to that parent. And she also ends up having to move to a new school where she kind of falls into the robotics club, and she's really good at it. And the problem with that is that largely the robotics club is male and they don't see why a girl needs to be there. She kind of has to carve her own way, but also the robotics club is very intense and overachieving, and she is not that kind of person. She does not put stock into grades in school, and she doesn't really put the effort in that the robotics club demands, so she kind of has to deal with that. And I loved this. I love this book for so many reasons. The romance in it is very cute. It's rivals to lovers, and it does a good job of actually genuinely being a rivals to lovers. They stay rivals for a long time. They don't fall in love in the first 5%, don't worry. It's a very good iteration of rivals to lovers. But also, she's dealing with a lot and I mentioned the whole parent side of thing. It doesn't shy away from that. The discussions on like family and parents and navigating complicated relationships with parents is really unpicked and developed and thought about in this, but also you get to see her kind of grow and start finding what she's passionate about and what she cares about and what she wants to do in life. I think the best thing about this book is that it talks about what happens when things don't go the way that you planned. A lot of books kind of feed into this narrative of you need to do this to succeed in life, and doesn't do enough, especially in young adult, to talk about what happens if you don't hit the milestones, what happens if you don't do what you need to, what happens if you're missing the normal markers of success. When everything goes wrong in a way that you cannot fix in any which way, it's done, it's finished, that's the final answer. What do you do next? And I like that this book addresses that, and I think more books for teenagers do need to address that, because you need to have teenagers who are prepared for failure just as much as they are prepared for success. The final book I'm going to talk about before I get into my top 3, this is the only author who has 2 books on my favourite books of the year list. So I just have to say, Simone killed it this year. And I have to talk about American Queen. Now this is Arthurian legend retelling, heavy on the BDSM, there's a bit of an age gap, and it's also polyamorous threesome. There we go. I think that's the best way I could describe this book. It's so good, guys. It is so good. It is so steamy. The steam, so I know I said Sinner had some of the best steamy scenes I've ever read, but this one takes the cheese. It has the best steamy scene I've ever read, barring Alexis Hall books. It is so steamy, it is so good, but it also really does a good job of actually being truly an Arthurian legend retelling, with all the complications that comes with. If you know the mythology, you know, it's all in here. It's all very discreet and very well done. It's what if, you know, Arthur and Gwen and Lancelot were in a threesome. But saying that, it also does not shy away from the polyamory in this one, and Simone does a good job of showing what it's like to discover you're polyamorous when you don't think of polyamorous as an option. These are 3 people who fall in love with each other and they don't know what to do with it, and that means there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of jealousy, there's a lot of heartbreak, there's a lot of betrayal in this, because navigating or finding out or finding a way to love everyone altogether is really complicated and difficult if you're not already informed of what polyamory is. The beginning of this is a bit hard for you to get through. There is a little bit of an underage situation that you've got to get past in the beginning, and there is insta love in this. They all kind of quickly and immediately fall in love with each other, and it does take a while for the plot to kick off, but as soon as it does and it time jumps into the future, which removes the underage situation by the way, it becomes really good. And I think my favourite thing about this is that the characters have so much chemistry with each other, like genuine chemistry, not only in the bedroom but outside of the bedroom. Maybe this threesome is like the president and the vice president and someone else, okay? It also deals with like politics, war, what you would do for love, what you would risk for love, and it does it really well. I don't know how to talk about this book yet because I read it in December, but I'll get there, and I just want you to know that you should read it. But now we are here for my top 3 books of the year, the best books that I've read this year, and I'm going to do them in order, so we're going to lead up to my best book of the year. So my 3rd best book of the year is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. This is a non-fiction book. It's written by a therapist, and this therapist is talking about her experience of being a therapist, what it's like being a therapist, the real truth of what therapists do, and also show some case studies of 3 of the people that she works with. And through this you get to learn about human behaviour, and I learned so much about myself, but I also feel like I've better been able to understand other people and what they are going through, because I see the repeated behaviours, the unique behaviours, and how talking to someone can make such a big difference. I think therapy was something that I was unsure of it working, because I've seen it works for so many of my friends and so many people, but was something I thought could never be for me. And through seeing 3 different case studies of how therapy works so differently for each person, even if they have the same therapist, really just helped me better understand what I would go into if I was going into therapy. I also love that it's such a beautiful book. At the end of it, I felt emotional. I almost felt like I was gonna cry, because so much development. You see these people in the case studies going through so much development with her as a therapist. But the key thing about this book is that the therapist herself goes through a really bad breakup and several different things are happening in her life, and she decides that she herself could do with some therapy. So you get to see what it's like when a therapist goes and sits on the sofa. You get to see what happens when the tables have turned, and she kind of psychoanalyzes her own experience throughout therapy, and how even though she knows lots of the steps and situations of what's going to come up, she still falls into the human patterns of behaviors. And I appreciated her honesty with us in those scenes with her experience, but also just how it cemented the ways in which we are all the same, but also ultimately all very, very different people too. The second best book that I read this year was Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. This is an Afrofuturism desert fantasy book where we're following our main character, and she has these powers that are very, very intense, and with these powers she can see that someone is set out to kill her, and so she decides that she needs to fight back before he finishes off the job. She is born in such a way that she is different, she is an outcast, and this book does such a good job of embodying what it means to be other, but also what it means to be other while still having friends, while still having people you connect to, while realizing and acknowledging you will never be the same as them, and there are some ways in which they will never ever be able to understand what you're going through. And I think that's an experience that lots of marginalized community people feel, but this book embodies it in a way that I just didn't, I've never seen it embodied before, and it did that so very well. I loved the desert fantasy setting. I loved that. I think I don't read enough desert fantasy. They can be hard to find, but this fulfilled everything I want from a desert fantasy and more. The magic system in this is complicated and unattainable, but she eases your way into it in a way that's so easy to understand and grapple with, and continues to build and build and build throughout the book. There's like a montage scene, which is a scene that I really hate in fantasy books, but it was never boring, and it was brief, and it was quick, and it was handled the way that it should be handled. Our main character is fascinating. I just loved the way that she thought. She was so angry, and she had every right to be angry, and I loved seeing a black angry main character get to fulfill and embody that anger without having to hold it back. There's a love interest in this one called Murata, and I loved him. I think he was fantastic as a love interest, and even though this is a book about teenagers, what I like about their romance is that it doesn't feel romantic even. It feels like a partnership, and I think that's the best way to describe them as a couple together. It's a partnership. It's a give and a take. It's a work together. They understand that they will always be together. There's some sheer love and dedication there, but there's also an understanding of this is what we're up against, and this is how we are going to fit together. This is what I can give you, and this is what you can give me in return. And they have to work through things like jealousy and friendship and navigating life together when it's not going to look the same as any other romance does or any other partnership would. And I love the way that was handled too. The ending was like a kick in the gut. It was suspenseful. It was building up to that ending. It felt inevitable, but at the same time it felt entirely unpredictable. Anything could happen, and this was such a good job of the play on the prophecy trope, the play on the chosen one trope. It was all done so well. Hands down the best fantasy book I read this year. I adored it. I adored it. I adored it. But now I've come to the point where I have to talk about my best book that I read this year. This is the book that almost made me, a non-crier, cry. This is a book that made me feel unshakable, unbelievable rage, unshakable, unbelievable sorrow, and also so uplifted in a way that I just can't comprehend. And I cannot believe a book made me feel all these emotions. And I cannot believe the best book I read this year was a non-fiction memoir, and that is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. Know My Name by Chanel Miller has been around for a long time. I'm sure lots of people have already read it, but it was my best book of the year. She is talking about her experience being sexually assaulted, waking up, not knowing what's happened to her, then realizing what has happened to her, and then taking the person who assaulted her to court, and the many, many years of psychological trauma that she has to undergo for doing this, and the impact it has on every aspect of her life, whether that's family, whether that's friends, whether that's financially, whether that's job, whether that's in understanding her identity. It's all there for you, because she goes through so much. And the fact that she has to go through all of this, doesn't matter whether she wins or loses the case, in every situation she loses, because there's so much that she has to undergo just for taking this person to court, and it really just shattered me in every single way. You see the effect that it has on her partner, you see the effect that it has on her sister who was there that night, you see the effect that it has on her parents, on everyone, just on everyone involved in the process. You see how long and dragged out it is, how exhausting. But also, when I say uplifting, it's because of where she is by the end of the book. It's because of the people and the experiences that she has with the survivor community and how they like rally around her. Sometimes when I felt like crying in this book, which was multiple times, it wasn't even because something terrible had happened, it wasn't even because something sad had happened, it was because something hopeful and beautiful had happened, and that still almost reduced me to tears. The waves of emotion that you go through in this was something else. I also read this quite close to having read The Secret Barrister, which does also touch on the British law system, and then hers is the US law system, and you see the flaws in both, and you see how both of them fail survivors time and time again. And just having read those two books really close together, which I don't know if that makes The Secret Barrister kind of secretly one of my best books of the year, but together they utterly destroyed me. This book utterly destroyed me, and I often talk about books I'm fangirling over, like this fantasy book destroyed me, this romance book and their relationship destroyed me. The fact that it's something real that happened in real life destroyed me, and not only happened to her, but has happened to so many women, so many trans people, so many men as well. It just breaks me. And so this book broke me, and I think if you can handle it, if you can handle those content warnings that are in the description box down below, you should also read it, because it's something you should experience so that you can take that anger that you feel after reading this book and take that sadness and channel it into something good, something productive around this. I feel like I had to go through reminders of so many emotions to make this video. We really have a representation of my reading style here. There's a bit of death, there's a little bit of horror, there's a lot of grief, there's some identity, there's some non-fiction, there's some romance, there's some steamy stuff, there's some middle grade, there's some young adult, there's a little bit of everything, and that's what I talk about on my channel. So if you would like to see more of that and what I end up reading in 2024, make sure you like this video and subscribe. Please leave in the comment section down below what was your best book that you read this year. I need to read some good books in 2024, so I am here to take your best book recommendations. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!